would have to do in a personal sense, or a small business person would have to cut back. Unfortunately, when big companies or banks get into trouble, they have too much clout in Washington. They have the inside track to the Federal Reserve, and they have pressure on the Congress. They get bailed out. Individuals, though, can't do it. And this is why, in the midst of the crisis, the banks got bailed out, and big corporations got bailed out, but we ended up owning the debt. The debt was bought by Treasury as well as the Federal Reserve. So the debt, when it gets too big, has to be liquidated. People have to either quit spending and work harder and pay it off, or they have to go into default and declare bankruptcy. Well, these companies shouldn't declare bankruptcy. They shouldn't have been bailed out by us. And instead of the debt being liquidated, the debt was transferred. The people who had it and made all the money were involved in derivatives and mortgages and built this housing bubble. That debt was transferred to us. The intent of the housing programs was motivated by a lot of people. Yes, there were some that knew exactly what they were doing and they were going to make a lot of money. They were motivated by a lot of people who said, well, people need a house. They said it's the American dream. Everybody should have a house, which is true. We should do our best. But that's usually should be achieved through sound economic policy, people working hard, saving money, getting a down payment, and getting home and taking care of it. But when you do it artificially, where the government finances it and you create credit out of thin air, you create a bubble and housing prices go up too high, and it's not too strange to identify bubbles. And when the housing bubble was present, it was very evident that bubble would burst. But instead of the right people being punished, it ended up people, the middle class lost out, many of them lost their jobs and they lost their houses. And we're still in the midst of this crisis. We haven't allowed the correction to occur. We haven't allowed the medicine to be given. And the medicine should have been on people who had all the advantages. And this is going to linger unless we address it. This is why I suggest we do the right thing, and that is cut back on the spending, pay down the debt, and get back to work again. That's not the most popular thing in politics, because people generally have been dependent on politicians who say, well, whatever's necessary, we'll give it to you, we'll print the money, we'll run up the debt, and we're going to take care of everything. But those days are over. They're over and gone, because markets are more powerful than the government. They're more powerful than even the central bank. Ultimately, economic laws rule, and that's what's happening right now. But the world has been based on, the world economy has been based on the dollar, because although the dollar is not backed by anything, even since 1971, the dollar has been issued from this country as if it were gold and the reserve currency. So other countries take them and hold them. So this is a worldwide event. Everything is intermingled. The banks of Europe now are in big trouble because they bought the debt from Greece and Spain and Italy, and the debt probably is close to worthless or worth half. But the banks don't want to take the beating on this. So our government is already lining up and saying, well, we'll print whatever's necessary. We don't want the banks to collapse because our banks are involved, and they're preparing to do this. The big problem is there's a limit to this, how long this can go. And I think that the crisis that we're facing, the reason people are pretty nervous, is they're starting to realize this too. So cutting back, to me, is not that difficult, because we do so many things that are unconstitutional. Since I'm a strict constitutionalist, it's not hard for me to figure out what to do. We should look at Article 1, Section 8, and just do what the Constitution tells us. And if we got into this trouble by not obeying the Constitution, why can't we get out of this trouble by just starting to obey the Constitution once again? And this would involve all areas of the economy. Sometimes in the debates they'll say, well, this debate is on foreign policy, not economic policy. Or they'll say, this debate is on economic policy and not foreign policy. But you can't separate the two. It's an economic issue to spend money overseas. We're spending $1.5 trillion overseas in the wars and the various foreign aid programs and all the international organizations that we're involved in. So it has an economic consequence. In the past 10 years, we've been involved in many different wars, continuous, and they're no win, they're undeclared, and they don't make any sense. But we're further in debt. The whole country is further in debt because of these activities. I was about $4 trillion in the past 10 years, and it's the debt is the problem. This is why I say we have to address the subject of foreign policy. We have to look to our traditions, all the way back to our Constitution, to the advice of the founders, to some of the traditions of the Republican Party when they talked about, not getting involved in other countries and policing the world. Even President Bush in the year 2000 ran on a foreign policy that is essentially what I'm talking about. Because he said at the time we should have a humble foreign policy, we should talk with nations and deal with nations. We shouldn't be in nation building, and we shouldn't be the policemen of the world. I suggest that would be a very good foreign policy, and that means we'd bring a lot of troops home and stop a bunch of these wars outright. We have assumed the role in too many areas. We have 900 bases, we're in 130 countries, but we never change our ways. We're still in Korea. We've been there since the 50s. We've been in Japan since the 40s, since World War II. We've been in Germany, subsidizing their defense since World War II. And we have to borrow the money to subsidize their defense, which indirectly then subsidize their welfare state. And then these wars that are going on are really draining us. Now, how would adherence to the Constitution help sort this out? Well, the Constitution is very explicit. And it was something, one of the reasons why the Revolutionary War was fought is to prevent the king or the executive branch to go to war without the permission of the people through the legislative branch. So we're not supposed to go to war unless the Congress declares the war. Now, the presidents go to war without permission. Sometimes they get the permission from NATO and the United Nations. I think a president should only go to war when there's a declaration of war by the Congress with the support of the people.